I brought a server with me to look for the overturned truck. Asking around everywhere, they mistakenly thought that inside the truck bed was millions of dollars worth of rubies. Looking at the looters gathering around, I knew my plan had succeeded. 10 years ago, my father was driving a large truck when unexpectedly his tire was punctured by a nail. After the accident, my father died on the spot, and the truck full of dairy cows was completely plundered by the nearby villagers. This was no accident. The nails were intentionally placed by the locals to make the truck tilt and overturn, seizing the opportunity to steal the cows on board. My mother wanted to sue them, but they threw tantrums, screamed hysterically, and refused to listen to reason, leaving even the police helpless. The case eventually faded into oblivion. In the blink of an eye, 10 years passed. I was driving a large truck once again, passing through the very place where my father met his tragic end. Except this time, what I was carrying in the back were 7 summer bears being transported to the zoo. I intentionally stopped to rest at a spot about 10 kilometers away from the village. The next second, an old man walked up to me. "Young man, what are you carrying? This stuff on the truck is worth millions. It's a secret cargo that can't be disclosed." The old man suddenly burst out laughing. This old man was the scout for the village. 10 years ago, when they caused the accident for my father, I had seen him. Back then, if he hadn't blocked the middle of the road and intentionally led my father into a trap, my father wouldn't have met with disaster. He stared intently at my bear truck, his expression growing more and more agitated. Then he pointed toward a turn ahead, saying that the highway up front had been under maintenance for over half a year. If you want to pass, you can only take the national highway. To dispel my suspicions, the old man enthusiastically introduced himself, saying he lived in the village ahead. "I can guide you, and you can give me a ride for a bit." As he spoke, he used greedy eyes to size up the cargo on my truck. He was all too familiar with this entire process. He had been doing such wicked deeds for 20 years. Under his hands, the number of drivers whose families were ruined and burdened with insurmountable debt were countless. Seeing that I was just a young man, he thought I would be easy to bully, so he knocked on the truck door harder. He wanted me to give him a ride, but I put on a troubled expression. "Mister, it's not that I don't want to go, but your people's reputation is just too bad. Previously, our fellow truck drivers came through your place and had their tires punctured. The whole truck of goods was plundered, and they are still in debt now." I pulled out the purchase invoice and intentionally waved it in front of him, telling him that this shipment was extremely valuable and nothing can go wrong. But the old man didn't pay attention to my words at all. He just stared at the purchase price, completely dazed. He figured that once the truck overturned, he could snatch a portion of the goods, wait a few days for things to settle down, and then resell them at a high price to traffickers, surely making a massive fortune. After all, it cost nothing and yielded pure profit. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. But he didn't know that this time, I had come prepared. Before arriving here, I had carefully discussed a counterplan with the other families of the victims. I had even called for another large truck filled to the brim with pig's blood to follow right behind me. This shipment of mine is very precious. There can't be any mistakes. Seeing how vigilant I was, the old man quickly waved his hands and said that those rumors were all intentionally spread by neighboring villages to smear them. He claimed they were very honest, simple people who wouldn't even be dared to kill a chicken, so how could they go out and harm people? Looking at the old man's hypocritical face, a flash of coldness gleamed in my eyes. However, I didn't show it outwardly. Instead, I opened the door and invited him up. As soon as the old man got into my truck, the first thing he did was pull out his phone to secretly send a text message, telling the others to prepare for a highway robbery. Having done all this, he started making small talk with me to lower my guard. However, what he cared most about was still the cargo in the truck bed. "Hey, young man, what kind of goods are you carrying? Why is it making squealing noises?" I cleared my throat. I intentionally said loudly that these were Kobe cows. "We exclusively supply them to major hotels in the capital to make Kobe beef. Ordinary folks like us don't have the money to eat that." My words thoroughly tricked the old man into believing it. His head was filled with scenes of the truck overturning and the goods being blatantly plundered. He couldn't hide the excitement at the corner of his mouth, but he had no idea that there were 7 Asiatic black bears inside the truck. If they were released, the entire village wouldn't survive. To avoid any trouble later on, before setting off, I intentionally used spray paint to write a few large words on the truck. "Hazardous cargo, do not open." The truck quickly rolled out and my heart grew heavy. This was the exact spot on the national highway where my father had met with his accident. When my father passed away, our family lost its pillar, leaving behind a massive debt. For the past 3 years, my mother had to carry the entire family alone. As a widow, she was gossiped about more than a few times. Every scene from the past kept swirling in my mind. I couldn't forget, and I didn't dare to forget. Right at that moment, the old man suddenly clutched his stomach and groaned continuously. My stomach hurts a bit. Let me get off the truck to use the restroom for a moment. I can just run back on my own later." Hearing him say that, I let out a cold laugh, and knowing the fish had swallowed the bait. The old scoundrel had already set the trap in the middle of the road. Demanding to get off the truck now was simply because he was afraid that the truck overturning would implicate him. But I had no intention of letting him off that easily. I shook my head, pointed at the navigator on the truck, and told him we hadn't reached the destination yet. Then I slammed on the gas pedal and sped up. If he wanted to harm me, then he could stay and die with me. The old man immediately panicked with fear. "Stop the truck for me. If I mess up the truck, it's going to stink. Even if you want to wash it, no one will dare to wash it for you." The old man's face was frantic. He begged me to stop the truck and even began to undo his belt. "It's fine. We truck drivers, what haven't we been through? There's a portable potty under your seat. Over all these years, I usually handle it on the truck anyway." He had used this very excuse to trick countless truck drivers, ruining their families. Even back then, when my mother and I came to claim my father's body, he shamelessly said that it was because my father had no brains, seeing nails but not knowing to stop. Thinking of this, I gripped the steering wheel tight. Seeing that the truck was about to reach the checkpoint, the very location where the traffic police incident occurred, I still had no intention of stopping. The old man grew more and more anxious. After all, he had been harming people for so many years and witnessed quite a few large truck drivers meet their end. The tragic scenes of broken arms and legs that followed. He just never expected that this time it would be his turn. He was trembling so hard his whole body shook, repeatedly pulling at my shirt, but I ignored him completely and slammed on the gas pedal once more. "Young man, if you won't stop, then don't blame me." The old man pulled a prepared iron hammer out of his pocket and smashed it hard against the truck window. But even using all his strength, it didn't damage the glass at all, not even leaving a single scratch. Frantic and weak, the old man slumped heavily back into his seat. "This is custom-made bulletproof glass, the same type Trump uses. Don't go breaking it for me. No need to be in such a hurry to use the restroom. We're almost there. I'll let you down right away. We're almost at the checkpoint." The old man's face turned pale with fear as he screamed at me, but I revved the engine twice more. The roar of the engine made it completely impossible for me to hear what he was saying. Panicking, the old man unbuckled his seatbelt and shouted into my ear, "Stop the truck." "Stop the truck for what? I have to send you on your way. Please stop the truck." I had people meddle with the road. They place sharp nails that can puncture the tires. When the time comes, the truck will tilt and overturn. We will both die. To save his own life, the old man laid out the plan to me without missing a single detail. But at this moment, the distance to the iron nails was only 20 meters. "Why didn't you say that earlier?" I slammed hard on the brakes. Unexpectedly, the truck crashed into a sloping pile of dirt. The front wheels flew up and immediately crushed the prepared nails. The truck began to tilt uncontrollably to the left. No matter how I steered or hit the brakes, it was useless. Just like that, it crashed straight into a large ditch by the roadside. In that split second, I felt all my internal organs collide and jolt together. Fortunately, I was already wearing a shock-absorbing impact vest. I was just a bit dizzy from the impact. Struggling to look towards the old man, I discovered that due to the momentum, he had been thrown from the passenger seat towards the front of the cab. He was pinned tightly in the passenger side, covered in blood. The old man told me to call the police, but he tightly clutched his own phone. He chose not to call the police immediately because he had something more important to do: destroy the evidence of the secret tip-off inside his phone. But because of a concussion, his vision was blurred and he couldn't see the delete button clearly. Faking concern for his health, I took the opportunity to step forward and knock the phone out of his hand. Then I tried to use my body to crawl out of the truck window to call for help. But unexpectedly, the people running towards us not only failed to rescue me, but they also snatched my phone and threw it into the bushes. I understood right then that they were afraid of me calling the police. They were terrified that if the police arrived, they wouldn't be able to loot and plunder the cargo anymore. "Hurry up and rescue us. Help us call the police. If you don't, the old man will..." Before I could even finish my sentence, the villagers had already swarmed forward. Auntie Tran led the pack, grinning from ear to ear as she eyed the cargo. "Why on earth should we help you call the police? Our old man already said so. This Kobe beef is premium stuff." With a troubled look, I pointed at the passenger seat. The old man, completely covered in blood, begged her once again to call the police. But Auntie Tran didn't even bother to look. She went as far as to hide her phone right in front of me, claiming, "I'm just a country bumpkin. I don't know how to use a phone, let alone how to call the police." Having said that, she shouted to the crowd, preparing to break open the truck bed. "We hit the jackpot this time. By the time this is over, every single household will be able to build a Western-style villa." They didn't care about the life or death of outsiders like us at all. Their eyes held nothing but raw greed for the cargo. In their eyes, we were merely a bunch of fools who had delivered a fortune to their doorstep. But she had no idea that the person penned inside the truck wasn't just me, but also her lifelong partner who shared her bed every night. Before long, more and more villagers began to gather. Everyone held a burlap sack in their hands and carried a basket on their back, surrounding the village square in no time. "No one open it. Absolutely do not open it. There are Tibetan black bears locked inside. If you let them out, every single one of us will die." Just as the words left my mouth, another large truck drove up from the entrance of the village. It also ran over the sharp iron nails at the front of the village and tilted over, capsizing on its side. Pig's blood spilled all over the ground. Seeing this, they swarmed forward with their baskets. "We're rich! To think some fools actually came to deliver their own lives today." The villagers were ecstatic, shoving past one another to scoop up the pig's blood. Seeing that the plan had succeeded, I strained my voice and yelled at them, "Absolutely do not open the truck door. If the Tibetan black bears inside get rescued and escape, we will all die." Hearing me say this, a middle-aged man sneered and forcefully yanked open the truck bed door with one hand. "Who are you trying to scare? Inside is definitely Kobe beef. Just listen to how loud the cattle are lowing." With that, the man flung the truck bed door wide open. But to their horror, the black bears lunged out, instantly terrifying everyone present to the point that they collapsed to the ground. Bears? How is that possible? They scattered in sheer panic while I took the opportunity to hide back inside the truck cab. The earlier collision had me dizzy and disoriented, causing me to lose consciousness unconsciously. What happened next was all up to Brother Lee. Brother Lee was an orphan who relied on his uncle until he turned 18. But 3 years ago, his uncle drove his truck through here and flipped over. The entire cargo on the truck was plundered, and his uncle was left in a vegetative state. Brother Lee let out a long sigh. After all these years, he'd finally caught this opportunity. It hadn't been in vain for him to live among these people for so long. For the past 2 years, he'd been constantly repairing roads and installing streetlights. On every single streetlight pole, he'd installed surveillance cameras for the sole purpose of gathering evidence to bring these bastards to justice. He looked at the looting footage on the surveillance cameras, capturing their greedy faces. Out of sheer humanity, he made an announcement over the loudspeaker. "The dangerous animals have escaped. Everyone, please lie flat on the ground immediately and do not make any sudden movements. Do not continue to provoke the black bears." He'd been making this standard announcement consistently for over a year, but every single time, it had been like playing a lute to a cow. Blinded by greed, they had completely ignored his words. But this time, everyone was incredibly obedient and didn't move an inch. Auntie Tran, hiding in the bushes, frantically dialed the emergency number with trembling hands. Once the call connected, she screamed into the receiver, crying and wailing at the same time. "Is this the police? Hurry up over here. This time we ran into Tibetan black bears. People are about to die. Hurry up and save us." Hanging up the phone, Auntie Tran slumped onto the ground. But she had no idea that the ambulance couldn't get through right away at all, because just a few hours prior, to prevent me from calling the police and to stop me from fleeing, the village men had piled up rubble and tree branches on the only road leading into the village. The obstacles originally meant to trap drivers had now become the tombstones blocking their own path to survival. What goes around comes around. They finally reaped what they sowed. Auntie Tran's wailing echoed far into the silent night. But those cries didn't fetch any neighbors to help. Instead, it only led to more agonizing screams. That night was bound to be a sleepless night. Everywhere was the sound of vomiting, the heavy thuds of bodies hitting the ground, and shrill screams of terror. Because the road was blocked, the first ambulance was stuck on the dirt road for over half an hour. The doctors and nurses had to step over the rubble to run into the village. That night, the red and blue flashing lights of the police cars and ambulances lit up the entire village. More than a dozen vehicles lined up in a long queue, yet they still couldn't carry away all the dying villagers. When I opened my eyes again, and it was already the next morning. The hospital room reeked heavily of disinfectant. The sunlight streaming in blinded my eyes, and as I moved my body, it felt as though my bones were completely shattered. A nurse was changing my medication. Upon seeing me, his expression grew incredibly heavy. "You're awake. You're truly lucky. Only minor injuries and a slight concussion." I remembered the old guide. At that time, he was pinned in the passenger seat. My head throbbed like a hammer was striking it. I asked the nurse in a raspy voice, "How is that old man?" The nurse let out a sigh and shook his head. That old man met a tragic end. Severe intracranial hemorrhage, both of his legs were crushed to pieces. Most importantly, when he was pulled out, the journey here took way too much time. Before he even reached the hospital, he breathed his last breath. Hearing this news, I almost burst out laughing. The old scoundrel who had ruined countless drivers, the old fox who had personally led my father down a dead end, ultimately died in his very own village right before the remnants of his own trap. This must be the will of heaven. This was karma. I looked out the window. The resentment that had been suppressed in my heart for 10 years had finally dissipated by half. After the nurse left the room, I looked at the chaotic scene of patients' families out in the hallway, feeling an undescribable sense of satisfaction in my heart. The nurse had just told me that the black bear incident this time was a massive one, involving several hundred people in total. Those with minor injuries suffered broken arms and legs, while those with severe injuries had their abdomens ripped open. Right now, the intensive care unit was packed to the brim. Because this was an exceptionally severe animal safety incident, reporters from major media outlets swarmed in like flies to blood. Holding their video cameras and recording pens, they tightly encircled the gates of the Northeastern Council. Those people who were usually arrogant and overbearing, now one by one they hid inside their houses, not daring to show their faces. He squatted in the corner of the office, smoking continuously. What worried him most right now wasn't life or death, but that overturned large truck. He knew that as long as the police investigated thoroughly, they would easily discover the nails in the tires and the artificial marks on the road. We have to dispose of that truck quickly, and those nails too. If they find out we intentionally flipped the truck, our entire lives are over. But before they could even come up with a countermeasure, a sharp scream suddenly erupted from within. No one knew whose house was frying fish, but it had caught fire. Because most of the villagers were currently weak and devoid of strength, absolutely no one was able to put out the fire. Driven by the wind, the fire rapidly spread across the entire village. The best part was that during the looting, someone had carried several tubs of pig's blood from my truck back to their house. Pig's blood encountering fire was true chaos. I watched the live broadcast on the television in the hospital. The fire in the village blazed into the sky, and half the village was blanketed in thick black smoke. Looking at the houses being reduced to ashes, I couldn't help but burst out laughing. This fire did not just burn away the ill-gotten wealth they had plundered, but it also incinerated the evidence of their wicked deeds over all these years, while simultaneously pushing them completely into the abyss. The massive blaze lasted for half a day, until it was finally extinguished by the firefighting team. Half the village turned into a pile of ruins. Lying on my hospital bed and looking at the blue sky outside the window, I thought to myself that this was probably the funeral the truck had prepared for them. Right at that moment, the door to the hospital room was pushed open, and two people wearing uniforms entered. They were police officers, carrying a notebook in hand. I immediately wiped the smile off my face, replacing it with a terrified, soul-shattered expression, and even a hint of grievance. "Are you Thanh Lam? We need to take your statement following standard procedures. Please cooperate." I nodded weakly. The police officer sat by the bed, his sharp eyes staring intently at me. He asked me why a truck that was supposed to take the national highway suddenly drove into that small deserted village. Was there some shady purpose? "Officer, I am innocent. It was all because of that uncle sitting in the passenger seat. He said the highway was blocked and the national highway was under repair and insisted on leading me down a shortcut. I gave him a ride out of the goodness of my heart, never expecting this would happen." The police officer asked me again if I knew I was carrying Tibetan black bears on the truck. I wiped away my tears and told him that of course I knew, which is why I had spray painted huge letters on the outside of the truck bed. I had even repeatedly reminded that uncle. After the police heard this, his brow furrowed tightly. Clearly, they still hadn't found enough evidence to contradict me. "Oh, right. Officers, have you found my phone yet? Normally, I have a habit of recording vlogs to document my life. life. After that uncle got into the truck, I felt he was a bit strange, so I secretly turned on the vlog recording function. Hearing up to this point, the police officer's eyes lit up, and he said to me, "The phone was found at the crash scene. Although it suffered water damage and the outer shell is shattered, the technical department is helping to recover the data inside." I laughed coldly inside. Inside that phone, it had not only recorded the dialogue of the old man tricking me into the trap, but also the events after the truck overturned. They had disregarded my warnings and forcibly broke open the truck bed. With that ugly face captured, as long as the data was recovered, this greedy crowd would not just be dying unfortunate, but criminals plundering in a felony case. I closed my eyes, quietly waiting for the final judgment to arrive. Lying on my hospital bed, looking at the stern face of the police officer before me, I knew every word right now was extremely important. I had to guide them to discover the true face of that old man. I took a deep breath, intentionally pretending to suddenly remember a crucial clue. "Officer, I suddenly remembered something. From the moment that guide got into the truck, his hands were never idle. He kept his hand inside his pocket, messing around with his phone." The police officer stopped his pen from writing. Lifting his head to stare intently at me, I continued to feign confusion. That old man's expression was very tense. From time to time, he would look up at my license plate as if he wanted to send my information to someone. I told the police that the old man said he wanted to lead me down a shortcut, but his eyes kept staring down at the road surface as if he were looking for some kind of marker. "Have you found his phone? I think there must be something inside." The police officer nodded, telling me that the phone had been found. Although it was damaged in the accident, the technical department was putting all its effort in recovering the data. I watched him step out of the hospital room, laughing coldly inside. Even unto death, the old scoundrel would never have guessed that the tool he thought would help him strike it rich would ultimately become the very thing that sent him to hell. The hospital room fell into silence. I closed my eyes, my head entirely filled with the miserable sight of that old man pinned inside the vehicle before he died. He had harmed so many people. This time, it was finally his turn. This was not merely an accident. I wanted to let the police personally expose the tumor that had been hidden for 20 years. I waited patiently, waiting for the truth that would prevent him from ever turning things around to be made public. 2 hours later, the police officer pushed the door and entered once again. His face looked even more grim than before. He held a technical report in his hand. As soon as he sat down on the chair next to my bed, he remained silent for a long time. Looking at his expression, I knew the technical department had retrieved something incredibly valuable from that shattered phone. The officer said to me, inside the old man's phone, there were several text messages he didn't manage to delete in time. The content of the messages makes one's blood run cold. It very clearly states your license plate number, as well as the time you would likely pass through. The most important thing is that the old man had instructed others to scatter nails and dig holes at the section passing the entrance of the village. Therefore, this was absolutely not an accident. They wanted to take your life. The police officer nodded. Through technical recovery, they discovered that this old man was absolutely not doing this the first time. In his call history and text messages, it was entirely filled with detailed methods on how to lure large trucks into traps, how to engineer vehicle accidents, and how to organize people to attack and plunder cargo. This matter had formed a complete functional chain. That old man was precisely the scout in charge of luring the prey. Sitting on the hospital bed, my shoulders trembled slightly. This was not fear, but pure exultation. When my father met with his accident back then, he must have received a similar text message. For the sake of money, these people had scattered countless death warrants on the road for drivers. The police officer told me that the technical department was currently conducting a comprehensive recovery of the data for the past few years. It was estimated that, along with a deeper investigation, even more victims would come to light. I looked out the window, silently calling my father's name in my heart. "Father, do you see? The karma of this pack of demons has truly arrived." The police officer's phone suddenly rang. He glanced at the screen and then hurriedly went outside to answer the call. I watched them pace back and forth continuously in the hallway, his tone growing increasingly grave. A few minutes later, he pushed the door back open, the look in his eyes directed at me carrying a slightly complex emotion. "Thang Ling, the situation is even more serious than we thought. This is not just a problem concerning that old man alone. This is a large-scale, organized criminal syndicate. The officer told me that through digging deep into the old man's social media accounts, they discovered that the number of suspects involved in the case was massive, nearly spanning an entire region. They had a clear division of labor. Some were responsible for tracking, some for scattering nails, some for inciting the crowd after an incident occurred, and some were even specialized in handling the plundered goods. This was a long-planned, organized case. The number of large truck drivers they had driven to their deaths was countless. Many drivers, unable to compensate for the cost of the lost goods, ultimately chose a path of despair. Meanwhile, this pack of villagers relied on this blood-stained money to build small villas and live comfortable, peaceful lives. So, do I have to be responsible for that old man's death? After all, he met with disaster while riding in my vehicle. I intentionally put on an anxious and fearful expression, tightly clutching the corner of the blanket. The officer spoke to me seriously. As long as it is determined that the old man was a co-conspirator in this intentional accident, you, as the victim, do not need to bear criminal responsibility. You even have the right to file a lawsuit against his family to pursue responsibility for his premeditated attempted murder. Hearing up to here, the heavy stone in my heart was finally laid to rest. The sword of criminal responsibility was now hanging directly over the heads of those people. But I knew this matter was still far from over. The incident of the Tibetan black bears injuring people was the true final act. The officer put away his notebook. The atmosphere suddenly shifted. He mentioned that although I was legally cleared of criminal intent, there were currently many villagers in the village who had been injured by the Tibetan black bears on my truck. Some were still undergoing emergency treatment, some had already died. This incident had caused a massive shockwave in society. The major administrative departments all had their eyes on me. As a transporter, although I had fulfilled my duty of notification, I still held a certain level of responsibility regarding supervision. The officer's words caused my heart to sink. He told me that this part of civil liability required legal experts to define clearly. If the court determined that my supervision was improper, the compensation I would face would be an astronomical figure. Too many people were injured, and several lives were hanging in the balance. No one could bear it. Officer, I truly warned them. I even spray-painted words onto the truck. I was merely the one carrying the goods. When they swarmed up to plunder them, there was no way I could stop them. As I spoke, I covered my face and sobbed loudly. The officer let out a sigh, patted my shoulder, and comforted me by saying that the law would deliver a fair judgment. He told me to rest and recover first, and that the subsequent investigation would require my cooperation. After the police officer left, I lifted my head from under the blanket. How could there be any trace of tears left on my face? I had long anticipated the issue of compensation, but I would not pay a single cent of this money. How could there be a scenario where robbers get beaten up and the victim still has to compensate them? I pulled out my phone to browse through the online comments regarding the bear attack incident. Public opinion had completely exploded. The vast majority of netizens supported me, fiercely criticizing the villagers' greed. This powerful wave of public opinion would be my most potent weapon to deal with that compensation. I looked at the gloomy sky outside the window, understanding perfectly well in my heart that this chess match had only just entered its most critical stage. On the 10th day after the case occurred, the incident had completely become the focus of national attention. Sitting on my hospital bed watching the television, the latest news broadcasted footage of the villagers who were once arrogant and tyrannical. Now, every single one of them is dejected, bowing their heads as they are prosecuted by the police in accordance with the law. Within these 10 days, a massive manhunt had taken place. After the news of the case being filed spread, many people who had participated in the looting, some of whom even had prior criminal records, had packed their belongings wanting to flee across the mountains. But they had underestimated the determination of the police. All exit and entry points of the village were locked down. Every single person who attempted to flee was apprehended and detained according to the law. The detention center is now packed tight with over 50 people. But I noticed that the news specifically mentioned one exception, the deputy village chief, Li Thang. He was an outsider who had embedded himself in this village for 2 years. Whenever an incident occurred, he utilized his position to secretly record it using the cameras on the street lampposts. Ultimately, Li Thang became the whistleblower who turned them in. Not only was he not prosecuted, but he has become a key witness for the police. Looking at the image of Li Thang walking out of the police station on my phone, the corner of my mouth couldn't help but curve up. This chess match was set up by us for far too long. Just when I thought everything was proceeding according to plan and that I had completely escaped suspicion, the door to the hospital room was pushed open. The people who entered were not doctors conducting a medical check, but two plainclothes police officers with cold expressions. They did not say many words, directly presenting a summons warrant.